And then that will take us to our last individual on the timeline. And we got another electric blues guy, and that is T-Bone Walker. And T-Bone Walker, another very famous individual, especially for blues. He is from Texas. His family moved to Dallas when his mother moved to escape a strict religious family, and his dad was also not trying to work in the fields anymore, trying to get out of plantation work. This is in the early 1900s. So T-Bone Walker, early on, one of his first sort of jobs, he was a kid at the time, but he was a guide for Blind Lemon Jefferson, who I believe I briefly mentioned when we were talking about some of the other blues artists, probably around maybe Charlie Patton or somewhere around that time period. And so Blind Lemon Jefferson was a well-known blues musician, but he was, as kind of implied, he was blind, and so he needed a guide. And when he came to the city, T-Bone Walker would help him out, and he would try to collect tips in the process. Another musical influence for him when he was a kid was his father played in a string band. It was called the Dallas String Band. And so Walker had the opportunity to learn, a variety of different string instruments. His first guitar was actually a cigar box guitar. And I think I don't remember if I've mentioned what a cigar box guitar is on the show before, but it's exactly what it sounds like. It's just a cigar box, which I don't even know, if people really know what that is anymore. But it's kind of it's kind of like a medium-sized box. I don't know what to compare it to, but not a huge box. And obviously you would take the top off, and you would string a neck to it, and then you would you attach like a little neck, and you would take some strings, wire in this case, and you would nail the wire across the top of the box so you could play it like a guitar. And so he mostly taught himself to play guitar. Reportedly, later on, he said he had some other sort of odd performing acts as he went along. One job was he performed in Dr. Breeding's medicine show. He was a tap dancer during that time, actually. And I don't know if people are familiar with what medicine shows are, but back in the day, I'm not familiar with Dr. Breeding, so I've never been able to find anything about that specific medicine show. But medicine shows were not, relatively speaking, biomedicine is, fairly new science, in the grand scheme of things. And so back in the day, you would have these medical professionals. For those of you listening, I keep forgetting that some people are only listening. So this is not the first time I've done quotes on this episode. So hopefully you can tell by my voice that I am making quotes. But right now I'm quoting, medical professionals would put on medicine shows, and these medicine shows were not. I would say they were not necessarily about medicine or sex. So, a lot of these medicine shows were definitely they were selling what people refer to as snake oil. So, essentially unproven medical remedies. Another thing to keep in mind is that part of this is during the Prohibition. And so a lot of these medicines that they were selling, quotes again, medicines, they happen to be have high percentages, very high percentages of alcohol in them. So, but they weren't alcohol, they were medicine, so it was okay. they also have often contained high levels of other types of drugs, like they'd be like have stimulants. They would have high amounts of like opium or an opiate, um, that type of stuff. And so perhaps they did help with certain medical ailments, but I think the general consensus or well accepted consensus is that the medicine shows were not really about medicine. They were about selling various tinctures and potions that had various properties to individuals. And a huge component of it was just considering the times that these were sort of live traveling shows, performances, and you would have entertainers. Some of them unfortunately did contain blackface performances. Like I said, I don't know about Dr. Breeding's medicine show. That's why one of the reasons I wanted to look it up, because I know just when we're talking about minstrel shows and vaudeville and all these different forms of entertainment, a lot of them contained that at the time, so I wasn't sure. And a lot of the other people we've mentioned on these timelines at some point encountered, blackface performances or different forms of entertainment where that was part of the show. But anyways, medicine shows are interesting, a little bit of an interesting thing if you ever want to look it up, if you're not already familiar. Kind of an interesting phenomenon for those times. T-Bone Walker also played with Fats Waller and Louis Armstrong early on in his career for short gigs. Eventually he moved to LA, and after moving to LA is when he really started to record a little bit more semi-professionally. He recorded his first song with Les Height called the T-Bone Blues in 1939, which became his one of his first successful recordings, even though it was an independent. And another thing about the first recording about the T-Bone Blues is that he was not playing guitar on the original recording, but it is one of the first songs that you can point out that people will recognize him for. But T-Bone Walker was, I think he actually took on the electric guitar before Muddy Waters. I think he started playing electric guitar at the very end of the 1930s, late 1930s, maybe mid 1930s. So he was huge in shaping electric blues. In comparison to Muddy Waters, he definitely owned it. He definitely adapted it to styles that would be consistent with like the West Coast blues. And so he was playing like a more contemporary sound that was more consistent with some of the other artists, what younger artists were shifting to, and he definitely helped shape that. In addition to being a skilled guitarist and singer, he was also a very good showman, similar to Charlie Patton, when I talked about him a while back, I think episode 2 maybe. Charlie Patton was known for a lot of his different gimmicks and showman tricks, and T-Bone Walker played or did a lot of the same things and other things. He was known for playing behind his head while doing the splits. He would play the guitar with his teeth. He was definitely that was definitely a component of his performance. And outside of Charlie Patton, I think he probably, up until this point, is probably the most well known for that. A lot of people will look at T-Bone Walker as one of the early people who did that, but then a lot of people don't know that Charlie Patton was famous for that. I think T-Bone Walker might be more widely known for those type of performance showman type acts, at least to this point in the timeline. He was a very good guitarist, though. You don't want to overshadow his guitar playing ability with the showman pieces. He had a very unique style of rhythm and tempo changes. Um, he definitely constructed his own sound, and I think it was very key for electric blues and electric guitar because, all of a sudden with electric guitar, the guitar really becomes more capable of becoming a solo instrument. So we were able to, a lot of these young musicians, including T-Bone Walker, were really working on crafting their own styles and bring, different approaches to music in a much different way than these Delta blues guys who are really worried about. A lot of these guys were really worried about rhythm guitar and a lot less about maybe being able to focus on some lead aspects or some solo aspects, because of course electric guitar really completely changes that, even though we're not necessarily talking about overdriven guitar or a lot of gain where where you have like these solos that we would associate with rock and roll. But even if you listen to early Muddy Waters, for example, even that amplification, that little bit of drive that that amps had at the time, or even that was enough to give a pretty significant electric guitar sound. It's definitely not the same as just using a clean tone, as what people might refer to it today. Is clean tone is kind of like almost like an electric acoustic sound, except it's clearly an electric guitar, but you don't get that overdrive. It's just gonna sound like a kind of like when people play acoustic guitar into a microphone. It's not exactly the same, but that would be the comparison. Whereas some of these early guitars, just because of the style of the pickups and the amplification, they almost jumped into a little bit of a drive sound. So that you definitely could clearly solo and clearly have a solo presence and add much more lead and individuality into your song, especially if you had a second guitarist there to play rhythm. So in 1947, he recorded probably his most famous hit, called Stormy Monday, and he also at the time recorded T-Bone Shuffle, which is also a fairly well-known song by him. And what's interesting actually about Call It Stormy Monday is that it is one of his few slow blues hits, even though it's probably his most well-known hits. And I think some people actually with Call It Stormy Monday would consider it one of the greatest blues songs of all time, just because of the timing. It's pretty, considering when he released it, it's pretty ahead of its. Even though it's a slow blues song, it's seen as pretty ahead of its time as far as the style and just really T-Bone Walker's knowledge and proficiency on guitars is pretty unique, considering that the electric guitar was brand new at the time, as far as playing it in the style that we would associate with electric blues and slow blues much more down the road.